I grew up not far from Lake of the Woods in northwestern Ontario. And when you live out here, the bush is like a second home. Summers get hot and muggy, and the bugs can drive you crazy, but it's also where you find the best trails. One August, my buddy and I decided to take the bikes out for a long ride. We packed some water, a couple snacks, nothing major. The air was heavy that day, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes you sweat before you even start pedaling. We rode along familiar paths for most of the afternoon, taking turns racing and trying to outdo each other, until we ended up pushing farther into the woods than usual. That's when we came across a trail neither of us had been on before. It looked rough, narrow, and barely used, but that just made it more interesting. We followed it, winding through thick stands of pine and birch, branches snapping against our arms and helmets as we moved deeper into the bush. After a while, the trail opened up into this clearing that caught us both off guard. Scattered all around were old, rusting cars. Some were so broken down and picked apart they were barely shells, while others still had their frames intact. It wasn't totally out of place. People up here dump cars in the woods sometimes, but the number of them was strange. It wasn't just one or two, it was dozens. We dropped our bikes against a couple of the frames and started wandering. Most of the vehicles were rusted through, missing doors or hoods, paint eaten away by weather. Some were tipped on their sides, others stacked halfway like someone had tried making walls out of them. For a couple of teenagers who loved building ramps and jumps, it was like a gold mine. We messed around for a good while, moving pieces of scrap, checking out the interiors, laughing at how destroyed some of them were. At that point, it just felt like a weird find, nothing more. But as the hours passed, the sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched across the clearing, things started to feel different. We were both sweaty, tired, and starting to think about heading home when we noticed something that didn't fit. Tucked near the back of the clearing was a car that didn't look like the rest. It was a black 1950 Buick Roadmaster. Unlike the other rusted-out shells, this one looked halfway restored. The body had been cleaned up, the chrome still shined in the fading light, and it wasn't missing its parts like the others. It sat there like someone had been working on it recently, only to suddenly stop and walk away. That was the moment I started to feel uneasy. There aren't any houses out in that area for miles. No cabins, no farms, nothing. It made no sense for a car like that to be sitting in the middle of a graveyard of junk. My gut started telling me we shouldn't be there. Still, we didn't leave right away. We tried to brush it off, kept telling ourselves it was nothing, just a weird coincidence. We were tired, and finding somewhere to sit sounded better than pedaling off just yet. We walked a little further down the trail and came across a dirt mound that looked like someone had been piling soil for a long time. That's when things shifted hard. All around the dirt were bones. At first I thought it was just deer remains, which isn't unusual in the bush. But then I saw more. Dogs, rabbits, a few bones I couldn't even place right away, maybe cats or something similar. Some of the skulls still had patches of fur clinging to them, yellowed and stiff from sun exposure. The smell hit me then, faint but sour, mixed with the damp earth and the heavy air. It made my stomach turn. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. My buddy walked closer, not looking nearly as shaken. He muttered something about hunters dumping animals, but it didn't explain the dogs. Hunters don't bring dogs out here just to kill them. I kept telling him we should leave. I could feel this buzzing under my skin, this instinct telling me something was off, but he just kept walking, circling the dirt pile like he was trying to prove it was no big deal. Then he stopped. I'll never forget the way his face went pale in an instant. He turned, eyes wide, and started moving back toward me fast. I forced myself to step around the dirt to see what had shaken him. On the other side was a crude shrine. Wooden posts had been driven into the ground, lashed together with old rope and wire. Hanging from them were more bones, strung up like decorations. Skulls placed carefully at the base, antlers tied with faded strips of cloth. Some of the cloth was stained dark, maybe from old blood, maybe just from weather, I couldn't tell. The whole thing looked like someone had been building it piece by piece over years. My chest tightened and my legs felt weak. That was it for me. I grabbed my bike so fast I nearly dropped it, strapping my backpack on with shaking hands. Every part of me screamed to get out. As I swung my leg over the seat, the woods around us went dead quiet. I was about to tell my buddy to hurry when a voice cut through the silence. It was a man's voice, deep and rough, shouting from somewhere in the trees to our right. Just one word, loud and sharp, H-U-Y. I've never bolted faster in my life. I didn't look for where it came from, I just started pedaling. Branches whipped across my arms as I pushed down on the pedals, gears grinding as I forced the bike faster than I thought my legs could go. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the dirt mound. An old man stepped out from the treeline. He wore a plaid shirt, blue jean overalls, and carried a shovel in his hand. He waved it in the air, shouting again, but I didn't catch the words. The only thought in my head was distance, putting as much space as I could between us and him. We rode hard until the trail widened and I started recognizing landmarks that meant we were getting closer to the main road. My lungs burned. My throat felt like sandpaper, but I didn't dare stop. We finally burst out of the bush onto the gravel shoulder of the road and skidded to a halt, both of us gasping for air. We sat there for a few minutes, hunched over the handlebars, drenched in sweat, chugging water like we just crawled out of a desert. My buddy tried to talk, tried to make sense of it, saying maybe it was just some old guy living out there. Maybe it was nothing dangerous. I couldn't even answer him. I just kept staring back at the tree line, waiting for movement. Then it came, a roar that made my stomach drop, the unmistakable sound of an engine firing up. Not just any engine, the deep, throaty rumble of the Buick Roadmaster we'd seen earlier. The sound carried through the trees, getting louder, closer. My skin went cold even in the humid night air. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just some hermit. He had been working on that car. He was out there keeping it ready. We didn't wait to see him drive out. We kicked back onto our pedals and tore down the road like our lives depended on it. It usually takes at least 10 minutes to get from that trail to my buddy's place, but I swear we covered it in 2. My legs screamed, every push of the pedals sending fire through my muscles, but I didn't ease up. I didn't look behind me. When we finally reached his house, we collapsed in the driveway, too exhausted to even drag ourselves inside right away. My heart was still racing, my body shaking, and I couldn't shake the sound of that engine from my head. That was 12 years ago. I've been back to plenty of trails since, but I've never gone near that one again. Every time I think about it, I remember the bones, the shrine, the old man with the shovel, and most of all, the sound of that Buick starting up in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what he was doing out there or why he wanted us to come back, but I know one thing for sure, we weren't supposed to find that place, and I'm glad we never went back. I had camped in the woods back home more times than I could count. From the Rockies to the Appalachians, I thought I knew what it meant to be out in nature at night. But camping in the Serengeti felt like something else entirely. The air itself carried a different weight, a reminder that this wasn't a place where people were the dominant presence. The first night I spent in that designated camping spot out on the open plain, I realized quickly that every sound out there reminded me that I was only a visitor, and a vulnerable one at that. We had pitched our tents near a small bathroom building, the kind of structure you'd be glad to have when you're in the middle of nowhere. There was a faint glow from the building, not enough to light the area, just enough to show it was there. I remember lying inside my tent, stretched out on my sleeping pad, listening to the strange mix of sounds around me. I could hear the dry grass brushing against itself in the breeze. I could hear the distant call of something I couldn't place. But the most distinct sound was the baboons. Their calls carried across the dark, sharp and uneven, sometimes close, sometimes distant. They made me feel like I was in their territory rather than mine. It was sometime deep into the night when I woke up with that familiar pressure in my bladder. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself I could hold out until morning, but it became clear pretty quickly that wasn't going to happen. I unzipped the tent slowly, the teeth of the zipper sounding far too loud in the silence. The air outside felt cooler, and I could smell the dry grass and dust carried on the faint breeze. I crouched low, flashlight in hand, and started walking toward the bathroom building. The ground felt uneven under my boots, patches of dirt and tufts of grass crunching with each step. I kept my light pointed low, not wanting to shine it too far out into the dark. I already felt exposed, just a small human in the middle of an endless plain where animals much bigger and more dangerous than me were moving unseen. My mind kept running through all the warnings I'd been given. Don't wander too far, keep an eye out, be aware. By the time I reached the bathroom building, my nerves were running high. The wooden door was painted in a dull color, chipped in places, and when I pulled it open the hinges groaned in protest. That's when it happened. A rush of wings and movement exploded above me. Dozens of bats shot out through the open doorway, so fast that all I saw was a blur of black shapes. The sound of their wings was deafening in the small space, like a sudden storm breaking over my head. I ducked instinctively, heart pounding, and for a moment I thought I'd be knocked flat by them. They streamed over my head and disappeared into the night, vanishing as quickly as they had come. When it was over, I just stood there gripping the doorframe, trying to steady myself. The building smelled of guano and damp concrete, sharp and sour. I swept my flashlight inside, half expecting to see something else moving in there. The stalls looked empty, the cracked floor wet in places where pipes must have leaked. The whole place felt eerie, like I had stepped into somewhere I shouldn't be. I did what I came for as quickly as possible, every sound amplified by the silence around me, and then I got out of there. I remember how badly I wanted to get back to my tent, to zip it shut and feel at least that thin layer of fabric between me and whatever else moved in the Serengeti night. I didn't sleep much after that. The calls of the baboons carried on, reminding me with every cry that the wild doesn't rest. A year or so later, on another trip in Africa, I found myself hiking in southern Ethiopia. The landscapes there were something else, green and alive in a way that seemed almost unreal. I was traveling with a local guide, heading toward a lake where we planned to take a small boat out to see hippos. The path twisted through patches of brush and scattered trees, the kind of place where every footstep stirred up the smell of earth and leaves. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the only sound being the crunch of our boots and the occasional bird call overhead. We were maybe halfway along the trail when the silence broke with a sound that made my stomach twist. It was a deep, guttural moaning that carried through the trees. Not a sharp cry, but something long and broken, drawn out like an injured breath. The forest seemed to still around it, the air holding its weight. My guide slowed, listening, and I found myself scanning the brush for movement, my pulse climbing without me realizing it. The sound came again, closer this time, and there was something in it that was both terrifying and deeply sad. It was the kind of sound that reaches into you, that you feel in your chest as much as you hear with your ears. We moved carefully, following it until the trees opened into a small clearing. That's when I saw it. A massive baboon was lying face down in the dirt, its limbs sprawled out at odd angles. Its fur was dusty and matted, and its body heaved with each ragged breath. From the way it was positioned, it looked like it had fallen from the branches above and landed hard. The moaning came from deep inside it, low and rough, like it was pouring all of its pain into the air around it. The sound filled the clearing, pressing down on everything. I stood there frozen, caught between fear and pity. The animal was huge, even lying there broken, and I knew enough to understand that getting too close could still be dangerous. There was no telling how it would react if we approached, or what other animals might be drawn by its cries. The forest around us felt charged, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I couldn't shake the sense that what I was seeing wasn't meant for me, that I was intruding on something private and ancient. We kept our distance, watching as it struggled. Its eyes were half closed, and there was no doubt it was dying. The sound of it cut straight through me, not just because it was frightening, but because it was so raw. There was something almost human in the way it moaned, as if it was aware of its own end. I felt small standing there, like I was witnessing a moment that belonged only to the wilderness. After a while, we moved on, leaving the clearing behind us. The sound faded as we put distance between ourselves and the animal, swallowed again by the quiet forest. I didn't say anything, and neither did my guide. The image of that baboon stayed in my mind long after, the way its body looked against the dirt, the way its cries seemed to vibrate through the air. Even now, I can remember it clearly. That night in the Serengeti, standing in a bathroom with bats flying over my head, I thought I had felt the edge of fear in the wilderness. But Ethiopia showed me something different, something I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about danger, about what might harm me. It was about how raw and unforgiving life out there could be, how fragile even the strongest animal was when the forest decided to take it back. Both moments reminded me that being out in those places wasn't like the camping trips I grew up with. There was no control, no safety net, just the reminder that I was small, passing through lands that didn't care whether I was there or not. And in that way, the wilderness felt more real than anything else I had ever experienced. I went hiking in the Lake District with my dad back in February 2018. The Lake District is one of those places that feels almost too perfect at first glance. The rolling hills, endless valleys, and patches of woodland scattered across the landscape look like something out of a painting. That winter, it was quiet and bare. The trees stood dark against the constant gray of the sky, and the air always seemed to carry a chill, even during the rare hours when the rain let up. My dad and I stayed at a bed and breakfast in a little village tucked between two hills. The whole trip was supposed to be about him checking something off his bucket list. He had this thing about hiking in the rain because it reminded him of his younger days living in Brazil. He told me it wasn't about the challenge so much as the way the rain made the world feel heavier, rawer, more alive. He wanted that same feeling again. The rain was relentless for the first few days we were there. Heavy drops hammered against the windows of our room at night, and the sound became so steady it almost felt like background noise. When we finally started our hikes, it was clear the weather wasn't going to make things easy. The ground was soft and sludgy, sucking at our boots with every step. The hills were slick, and streams had overflowed onto paths, cutting muddy lines through fields. Still, my dad was in his element. He pulled on his waterproof jacket, tightened the straps on his pack, and looked like nothing in the world could bother him. On the second day, we set out early, pushing ourselves further than the first. The trail took us along the side of a hill where the view opened up across a valley. From up there, you could see the patchwork of fields and stone walls, small cottages huddled at the bottom like toys scattered on the ground. The rain had eased a little by the afternoon, but the ground was soaked through. Every step felt like standing on a sponge. By the time we reached a steep incline near the end of the route, both of us were drenched and coated in mud up to our knees. We decided to sit and rest. The hill dropped away sharply beneath us, maybe 20 feet down to the flatter ground below. It wasn't a cliff, but it was steep enough to make you careful where you put your feet. From where we sat, the view stretched westward, and we could just make out the sun trying to break through the clouds as it began to dip toward the horizon. There was this orange glow fighting against the gray, lighting up the wet fields and stone walls until everything looked painted in fire. For a moment, it felt worth the discomfort, the wet clothes, the mud, the fatigue. Then the ground shifted. It was so sudden I barely processed it. 1 second I was sitting there, watching the sun bleed across the hills, and the next the earth gave way beneath me. The sound wasn't loud at first, more like a deep groan from the hillside itself. The mud loosened under my weight and I felt myself slide. My body lurched forward, and I grabbed at the wet grass, but my hands slipped straight through it. In a blink, I was moving downhill, mud and water carrying me like a broken branch in a flood. I went about 15 feet before I managed to stop myself. My ankle twisted sharply under me as I dug my boots into the mud, sending a bolt of pain through my leg. Felt like fire shooting up to my knee. My hands clawed at the ground, trying to hold onto anything solid, but it was all sludge. My dad reached out from above to grab me, but the moment his weight shifted, the ground beneath him collapsed too. He came sliding after me, his body half buried in mud as he tried to slow himself down. By the time I finally stopped moving, I was almost at the bottom of the hill where it leveled out. My whole body was caked in mud. It had plastered itself against my chest and legs, clinging to my clothes and seeping into every fold. My boots were filled with it. My hands, my jacket, even the side of my face, it was all smeared brown and black. My ankle throbbed with every pulse of my heartbeat. I tried to move it, but the pain made my stomach churn. I was scared I'd broken it. My dad managed to stop himself just above me. He scrambled his way down through the mud until he was beside me, his clothes just as ruined. He looked shaken but unhurt. He pulled at the mud around my legs, digging me out slowly. It was strange how heavy it felt, like trying to lift wet cement. By then, the sun had almost vanished, leaving the sky darker by the minute. The cold set in fast once we stopped moving, and I could feel the wet fabric against my skin turning icy. It took him nearly 20 minutes to clear enough of the mud so I could move again. The ankle wasn't broken, but it was badly sprained. Every step I tried to take sent a wave of pain up my leg that nearly made me collapse again. We both knew there was no way I could hike the rest of the way back, not in that state. That's when my dad called for help. The air ambulance was the only option. Those next minutes waiting for it felt longer than the slide itself. The cold seeped in deeper, and I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way the ground had simply let go beneath us. It was a reminder that no matter how beautiful a place looked, it didn't care whether you were ready or not. The hillside had been weakened by the constant rain, and our weight had been just enough to set it off. Simple as that. When the helicopter finally came, the noise of its blades cutting through the evening sky was the most welcome sound I'd ever heard. The crew lifted me out, strapping me into a stretcher and hauling me up with steady hands. Looking down from above, the hill that had swallowed us didn't look like much at all, just a wet patch of earth with a scar cutting through it. But standing on it, sliding down it, trapped in it, it had been a different story. I didn't break any bones, but I carried the memory of that moment for a long time. The helplessness of sliding down with no control, the cold weight of the mud pressing against me, the fear that something had snapped inside my leg. All of it stuck. Hiking had always felt like freedom to me, like a way of moving through the world without barriers. That day, I learned how quickly it can turn into something else. Even now, when I think of the Lake District, the first image that comes to mind isn't the beautiful valleys or the cottages or the glow of the sunset. It's the feel of the ground moving, the sudden drop beneath me, and the mud closing in around my body. That was the closest I've ever come to real danger out there, the kind you can't talk your way out of or fight through with sheer will. And it was a reminder I never forgot, that the hills and valleys don't bend to us. They move when they want to, and all you can do is hope you're not in the way when they do. I was out solo hiking in Italy in 2016, on a trip that had been planned for months. I had been moving through different parts of the country, and one of the hikes I had really wanted to do was up to Monte Ferrato. It's a natural stone arch that frames a view of the coastline, the sea stretching wide, and behind it, the rugged lines of the northern Apuan Alps. I had seen photos before going, but standing there in person was supposed to be an entirely different experience. The morning I started the trail, it was clear, the kind of clear where the sun burns down without a single cloud to hide it. The path was narrow but well-worn, weaving through patches of brush and low trees, climbing steadily upward. I had my backpack on, water, a few snacks, map folded inside the top pocket. I had expected the hike to be quiet. It wasn't a tourist-heavy time of year, and I was far enough from the popular towns to avoid big crowds. For the first hour or so, it was exactly that. Silent except for birdsong and the crunch of gravel under my boots. Halfway up the trail, I came across a couple descending. They were maybe in their 50s, dressed in hiking clothes, but what struck me first was the way the man looked at me. He wasn't just glancing. He was staring with this unsettled, almost alarmed expression, as if I had walked out of some nightmare. I slowed down, and when we were about to pass each other, he stopped dead in front of me and put his hand on my shoulder. His skin was clammy, his grip shaky, his face pale like he'd been sick or badly startled. For a moment I froze, caught off guard, unsure if I should pull back or just stand there. There was nothing aggressive in him, though. He didn't look like he wanted to harm me. If anything, he looked like he'd just seen something that terrified him. His wife quickly wrapped her arm around him and steered him away. She said something in broken English that I only half understood, but the gist was that I reminded him of someone. Then they went on down the mountain, leaving me standing there, confused. The man's expression stuck with me, though, the sheer shock in his eyes. It was the kind of look people get when they see something they shouldn't have seen. I tried to brush it off as I continued upward, but it nagged at me for the rest of the day. Later, I realized that was only the first strange moment of that hike. By the time I made it near the top, I had been walking for hours. The views were incredible, but I ended up getting myself turned around while trying to find a shorter way down. Instead of staying on the marked path, I veered off toward a small stream that looked like it would lead downhill. My map showed that if I followed it far enough, I'd hit a road. That seemed simple enough. At first, the stream was manageable. I walked along its edge, stepping over rocks and ducking under low branches. The water cut a shallow groove through the ground, trickling fast over stones. But after a while, the terrain changed. The stream narrowed into a steep rock ravine, and then sank into a sinkhole that dropped farther down than I was comfortable with. I couldn't climb around it. It was too wide and the edges too unstable. That meant backtracking and heading uphill again, trying to find another route. I pulled myself up onto a ridge, sweat rolling down my neck. The ground was rough, dry soil broken by roots and loose stones. When I finally reached the top, I found myself facing an old shepherd's hut. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The roof had collapsed in, red tiles broken and scattered across the ground. The stone walls were still standing, though cracked and overgrown with weeds. A single window gaped empty, and the doorway leaned crooked as if it could fall at any moment. I dropped my pack against one of the walls and sat down to catch my breath. My legs ached from the climb, and my throat was dry. I pulled out my map, trying to trace where I had gone wrong, and figured I needed to cut east to reconnect with the main trail. I leaned back against the cool stone of the hut, letting myself rest for a few minutes, staring at the line of the mountains in the distance. That's when I heard it. A faint sound from inside the hut, tiles cracking underfoot. At first, I thought maybe it was just part of the structure shifting, but then it came again, a quick series of light steps, sharp against the silence. I stood up fast, heart racing, moving a few steps back from the wall. My mind jumped immediately to the thought of someone hiding inside, though the sound was too light, too quick. I edged closer, cautious, and peered through the broken window. Inside, moving across the rubble of the collapsed roof, was a goat. Just a mountain goat, brown and lean, picking its way across the debris. I let out this sharp laugh of relief, shaking my head at myself for being so jumpy. When I laughed, the goat startled and darted out the back of the hut, disappearing behind the stones. Curious, I followed, circling around the hut. That's when I came out to the back and saw the steep valley behind it. It dropped into a sharp V-shape, the kind of slope you'd slide down without stopping if you made one wrong step. On the other side, the land climbed sharply upward again. I looked down the slope, expecting to see the goat somewhere along it. First, I thought it was gone completely. Then I spotted it on the opposite incline, climbing at a speed that didn't seem real. The angle of the slope played tricks on my eyes. For a moment, it didn't look like a goat. From where I stood, the incline made it appear upright, running like a man. A muscular figure, horns jutting from its head, scaling the slope in long strides. It jolted me so hard I blinked, convinced I was seeing something unnatural. Then my brain caught up with what I was looking at. It wasn't some half-man creature. It was the goat, scaling the incline with the effortless speed they're known for. The perspective of the valley made it look like something else entirely. I stood there for a long time, just watching until it disappeared over the ridge. My chest was tight, my hands shaking from the adrenaline of the moment. If I hadn't seen that goat in the hut first, if I had only looked up and seen it climbing the opposite ridge, I could easily imagine walking away from that spot believing I had seen something out of legend. A faun, a satyr, whatever name people might give it. The way myths get their roots made sudden sense to me. It didn't take supernatural beings, just the right angle, a tired mind, and an animal moving in ways your brain didn't expect. When I finally picked up my pack and set off again, I moved carefully, paying more attention to the terrain. The woods closed in again as I worked my way down, the sun slipping toward late afternoon. I eventually reconnected with a road just as I'd hoped, though it took longer than I thought it would. My legs were worn out, and I was grateful when I finally made it back to where I had started. That hike has stayed with me ever since. Not just for the beauty of the views or the effort it took, but for those two strange moments. The man who looked at me like I was a ghost, and the goat that almost fooled my eyes into seeing something ancient. It reminded me how easily fear, exhaustion, and perspective can bend reality. There didn't need to be anything otherworldly. The mountains and the human mind were enough. I wasn't far from home that day, maybe less than a mile, but the woods around our place always had a way of feeling deeper than they really were. Even when you knew exactly where you were, even when you could probably yell and someone back at the house would hear you, there was still that kind of quiet that made you feel like you were much farther out. I had taken the family dog, Wally, with me, figuring I'd give him a chance to burn off some energy before dinner. He wasn't the bold type of dog, usually timid, kind of skittish even, but he liked following me when I cut off the trail. It was late afternoon, still enough daylight left that I didn't feel the need to turn back yet. The air smelled like pine and damp soil, the kind of smell that sticks in your clothes. I let Wally sniff around while I stepped over a downed tree, brushing aside some low branches as we worked through a patch of brush. That's when I noticed him. The man came out of the trees without a sound, like he had just stepped through a doorway I hadn't seen. He was dressed in full camouflage, head to toe, like the kind of gear you'd expect from a hunter, except he had no pack, no rifle, nothing but a massive knife strapped to his belt. His arm was in a sling which stood out right away. It didn't look fresh, but it was strange, like the kind of injury that should have had him laid up instead of walking alone out here. Wally froze the instant he saw him. His ears went flat, his body stiffened, and then he started barking and growling like I had never heard from him before. Wally wasn't the type of dog that got aggressive. He usually backed away from strangers, even mail carriers. But this time he was straining against the leash, teeth bared, hackles raised. That reaction put me on edge immediately. The man wasn't smiling. His face was hidden behind big sunglasses, even though the sun was low and the woods weren't all that bright anymore. He opened his mouth and started talking, and though the words themselves weren't anything wild, the way they landed felt wrong. He said he was hiking from one town to the next, just passing through. That didn't make sense at all. He was hurt, had no pack, wasn't even on a trail, and looked like he had just been standing out there waiting. I stood there, hand tight on Wally's leash, watching the man while Wally's growls echoed through the trees. My heart was pounding harder than I wanted to admit. The guy gestured vaguely with his good arm and said something about how maybe the dog was acting that way because of his sunglasses. Then he added that since he was injured, maybe I could show him the way out, point him back toward the road. Everything about it was off. I knew these woods well enough to tell him the trail wasn't far, but instead of answering right away, I said something about needing to get home for dinner, how I couldn't stay out much longer. I stepped sideways, meaning to go around him to cut back to the trail myself. That's when he shifted. He didn't lunge, didn't make any sudden move, but he stepped directly into my path, blocking me. I froze. Wally went wild, barking and pulling like he was ready to tear away from me. My stomach twisted, because I realized then just how alone I was, even if the house wasn't all that far. There were no other hikers, no cars, no one else who could have walked up right then. The only sound was Wally losing his mind and my own blood rushing in my ears. Then I heard it. My mom's voice, clear and sharp, calling my name from back toward the house. The sound cut through the silence, and even Wally stopped barking for half a second. The man heard it too. I saw his face change. He stiffened, like the shout had startled him more than it should have. I yelled back as loud as I could, telling her I was there, my voice cracking a little. The moment I turned back to look at the man again, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound of brush moving, just gone. 1 second he was standing in front of me, and the next he had melted back into the trees without a single sound. I stood there for a moment, clutching Wally's collar, my chest heaving. It didn't make sense. A normal person would have called back to my mom, maybe waved, maybe even walked with me to meet her. He hadn't done any of that. He'd slipped away like he hadn't wanted to be seen at all. I hurried back toward the trail, barely keeping Wally under control, my eyes darting to every shadow in the woods. Every time I heard a branch snap, I thought it was him again, waiting, maybe circling around. The short walk back felt twice as long as it should have, every step tight with the thought of being followed. When I finally saw the clearing and caught sight of my mom standing near the edge of the trees, I didn't let myself look back. My legs carried me faster, like the very act of turning would give him the chance to be standing there again, closer than before. I only stopped when I reached her, Wally still bristling and panting like he'd run a mile. I didn't explain much right then. I just said I was ready for dinner, pulled Wally toward the house, and left it at that. Later, lying in bed, I thought about it more than I wanted to. If he was really just a hiker, he would have said goodbye, maybe even waited to meet my mom. Instead, he slipped away like he'd been caught. To this day, I don't know what he wanted or why he was out there without gear, with that knife, with his arm in a sling. I just know I was glad Wally had been with me, because he had sensed something I couldn't ignore. Looking back, I think the only reason that moment ended the way it did was because my mom had called out when she did. If she hadn't, I don't know how long he would have kept blocking my path or what he had in mind. It was only a mile from my own house, a place I thought I knew, a place I thought was safe. But that afternoon showed me how quickly it can all turn, how fast you can go from feeling at home to feeling hunted, even in your own woods. That man never came back, and I never saw him again, but I still think about the way he vanished into the trees, silent as if he had never been there at all. Wally's gone now, but I'll always be grateful for him that day. He wasn't the brave type, not usually, but sometimes a dog just knows, and that time he knew better than I did. Every time I walk those woods now, I can still picture the spot where that man appeared, and I can still feel the weight of what could have happened if things had gone even a little differently.